The storm rolled in with a ferocity that rattled Alex's tiny house on the outskirts of town. Rain lashed against the windows, and wind howled through the dense pines surrounding the property. The house, a lonely remnant of 19th century architecture, sat far from neighbors and even farther from distractions. It was the perfect place for a writer battling creative drought, or so Alex had believed 6 months ago. Now the solitude felt oppressive. The blank pages of the manuscript taunted them, their crisp whiteness unyielding under the feeble light of a desk lamp. Alex sighed, running a hand through their messy hair and glancing at the clock. Midnight. Just as Alex rose to refill their coffee, the sound came, a sharp, hollow knock against the front door. It sliced through the rain and wind like a blade, startling in the stillness of the house. Who would come here at this hour, in this weather? Heart pounding, Alex crossed the creaky wooden floor to the door. Through the peephole, they saw nothing but the swirling darkness of the storm. Reluctantly, they opened the door a crack. A gust of icy air swept inside, and with it, a package wrapped in brown paper sat alone on the porch. There was no delivery van, no shadowy figure disappearing into the night, only the rain and the endless sway of the pines. Curiosity prickled through Alex as they brought the package inside, locking the door firmly behind them. It was heavy for its size, the paper damp but intact. There was no return address, only a short note in spidery handwriting tucked beneath the twine binding the parcel. For stories yet untold. Alex unwrapped it slowly, the paper crackling in protest. Inside was an old typewriter, its black enamel gleaming despite its apparent age. The keys were ornate, the letters etched in a faintly metallic font. Something about it felt alive. The machine seemed to hum faintly, as if it had been waiting. The writer in Alex stirred, a flicker of intrigue breaking through the gloom of creative inertia. Without understanding why, Alex cleared the desk of notebooks and abandoned drafts, placing the typewriter in the center. They loaded a sheet of paper, fingers hesitating over the keys. Just a few lines, Alex murmured, as if to justify the impulse. The first keystroke felt oddly satisfying, a firm, mechanical click followed by the light impression of ink on paper. It had been years since Alex used anything but a laptop, but the typewriter felt strangely familiar, almost natural. The words flowed without effort. The opening lines described a storm, much like the one outside, a small town cloaked in rain and secrets. A chill crept into Alex's spine as they realized the rhythm of the rain outside matched their imagined downpour exactly, each detail aligning eerily with the scene they'd just typed. Dismissing the thought as coincidence, Alex typed on. The next morning dawned with weak sunlight filtering through heavy clouds. Alex woke late, the typewriter's keys still faintly imprinted on their fingertips. The storm's remnants lingered in the air, the world outside heavy with rain-soaked silence. Their curiosity about the typewriter deepened as they brewed coffee, replaying the vivid writing session in their mind. The words had come with startling clarity, as if they were being whispered into Alex's ear. But who had sent the machine? And why? Deciding to clear their head, Alex ventured into town for supplies. The streets of Coldwater were slick with rain, the storefronts gleaming dully in the overcast light. At the local cafe, Alex ordered a coffee and glanced at the menu, only to pause mid-read. Rainy Day Brew, the house favorite. The name was unfamiliar. Alex had frequented the cafe for years and had never seen it listed. The description, however, matched the drink a character in last night's scene had ordered, down to the curious addition of lavender syrup. Alex's stomach tightened. It wasn't uncommon for cafes to rotate their offerings, but the timing was unnerving. When the barista brought the coffee, Alex couldn't resist asking, "Is this new?" The barista, a cheerful woman with curls escaping her hairnet, smiled. Sort of. We added it last night. Weird timing, right? The rain inspired us. Alex forced a smile and sipped the drink. It was delicious, comforting, familiar. Yet it left a strange aftertaste, a subtle reminder that their fiction had slipped too close to reality. Returning home, Alex tried to brush off the incident as coincidence. But as they typed again that evening, the feeling of unease grew. The narrative was taking on a life of its own, the plot spinning in directions Alex hadn't planned. New characters emerged unbidden, a soft-spoken librarian with a secretive air, a child who spoke in riddles. Their dialogue flowed as if Alex were merely recording it, not creating it. That night, sleep came uneasily. Alex dreamed of the librarian from their story, her face pale and half hidden by shadows. In the dream, she stood by the typewriter, whispering in a language Alex didn't understand. When Alex woke, the whisper lingered in the still air of the bedroom, faint yet insistent. The following day, Alex drove to the park, hoping for inspiration or perhaps distraction. But when they arrived, their breath caught. A figure sat on a bench near the fountain, one leg crossed over the other, reading a tattered paperback. She wore a heavy coat, her hair pinned back neatly, just as Alex had described the librarian in the second chapter, and she was staring directly at them. Alex froze, clutching their coffee cup as the woman on the bench locked eyes with them. Her gaze wasn't hostile, but unsettlingly familiar, as if she recognized Alex from a long-forgotten meeting. This can't be real. Swallowing their nerves, Alex turned away, but their legs moved involuntarily, carrying them closer. The woman didn't look up from her book as Alex approached. It was only when they stopped a few feet away that she closed the paperback and tilted her head, a faint, knowing smile on her lips. "You're not what I expected," she said, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut through the sounds of the park. The exact words Alex had written for her introduction in last night's chapter. Alex's breath hitched. Do I know you?" Her smile widened, and for a moment, Alex was struck by how vividly they had described her in the manuscript. The silver streak in her dark hair, the slight crow's feet around her eyes, even the peculiar brooch shaped like an open book. "You could say that," she replied, standing gracefully and tucking the book into her coat pocket. She gestured to the bench. "Sit. We need to talk." "I don't," Alex began, but their words faltered under her piercing gaze. "You wrote me into this, didn't you?" she asked, her tone calm but tinged with accusation. "The typewriter, it's clever, isn't it? It takes what you imagine and makes it real. But you don't understand the rules." "The rules?" Alex echoed, sinking onto the bench despite the protest rising in their chest. "This is insane. This is a coincidence." Her expression softened with pity. "That's what I thought at first, when I woke up in your pages, when I realized I existed only because you decided I should. But the truth became clear very quickly. Your stories don't just create, they trap." Alex's mind raced. Trap? It wasn't possible. The typewriter was just an antique, a prop they had romanticized into creativity, wasn't it? "I don't know what you mean," Alex said weakly. "You're not real. You can't be." The librarian laughed softly, a sound as brittle as dry leaves. "Think that if you like. But consider this. You didn't create me from scratch. You wrote me from fragments of people you've seen, memories you've forgotten. And now, I'm here, whether you believe it or not." The conversation was spiraling into absurdity, yet Alex couldn't shake the gnawing sense that she was telling the truth. The coincidences, the cafe menu, the strange flow of the story, and now this woman, piled too high to ignore. "What do you want from me?" Alex asked, their voice shaking. "To be set free," she said simply. her smile disappeared, replaced by a weary sadness. But the typewriter doesn't let go easily, and if you don't figure out how to break it, neither will you. Before Alex could respond, the woman turned and walked away, her figure dissolving into the shadows cast by the skeletal trees. Alex sat frozen, heart pounding, as the world around them seemed to shimmer and blur. The typewriter stood in the center of Alex's desk, gleaming faintly in the dim light of the room. Its keys seemed to pulse with a life of their own, daring Alex to sit and type. That night they couldn't resist. If the librarian's cryptic warning had unsettled Alex, it also awakened a gnawing curiosity. The only way to make sense of the madness was to write. The story, Alex thought, would reveal the answers. The moment their fingers touched the keys, the words poured out like water. The librarian returned to the pages, pleading with Alex's protagonist to escape a crumbling library as its walls closed in. Alex wrote feverishly, almost hypnotically, describing the character's attempt to flee the collapsing structure. But as the library fell, the typewriter resisted. The keys stiffened under Alex's hands, and words appeared unbidden. Not yet. Rewrite, but not yet. Alex's pulse quickened. They hadn't typed those words. The typewriter. It's alive. Their hands hovered over the keys, paralyzed by a growing dread. "What are you?" Alex whispered, their voice barely audible. The typewriter responded. The spacebar clicked, and a single line etched itself onto the paper. "You know me." Alex stumbled back, their chair scraping loudly against the floor. The room felt colder, the shadows on the walls stretching unnaturally long. Every instinct screamed to leave, to abandon the machine and never look back. But Alex couldn't. Something compelled them to sit again, hands trembling as they reached for the keys. The story took on a life of its own. Characters spoke in riddles, warning Alex's protagonist of an artifact with the power to rewrite existence, but at a cost. Details appeared that Alex hadn't planned. A stained glass window shattered in a storm, its shards forming cryptic symbols. A clock that always stopped at 11:59. Whispers from unseen sources guiding the protagonist deeper into danger. By dawn, Alex was shaking with exhaustion. They reread the last page and realized with a chill that the protagonist was now trapped, much like the librarian had described. Worse, the details in the story were bleeding into Alex's reality. The clock on the wall had stopped. The shards of a broken mug on the kitchen floor resembled the symbols they'd written. Desperate, Alex tried to erase the last scene by typing over it. But the typewriter fought back, keys jamming and paper curling at the edges. It wasn't just a tool, it was a predator. The doorbell rang, shattering the tense silence. Alex flinched, nearly knocking the typewriter to the floor. They approached the door cautiously and found another package sitting on the step. This one was smaller, wrapped in the same brown paper and sealed with wax. The note inside read, "The final chapter awaits." The weight of the words sank like a stone in Alex's chest as they turned back to the typewriter. The machine hummed softly, its keys poised like teeth waiting to devour. The room felt suffocating, heavy with the faint hum emanating from the typewriter. Alex stared at the note in their trembling hands. The final chapter awaits. The wax seal, a perfect imprint of the typewriter's cue key, seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. Alex dropped the note onto the desk and turned toward the machine. Its glossy surface reflected the dim glow of the desk lamp, the keys poised in an eerie stillness, daring Alex to finish what they had started. Every instinct screamed to leave, to abandon the cursed contraption and the horrors it had brought. But something deeper, a compulsion as dark as the storm outside, drew Alex back into the chair. The typewriter's carriage shifted on its own, aligning perfectly. A blank sheet of paper lay in its jaws, waiting. Alex placed their fingers hesitantly on the keys, the cold metal biting against their skin. With a deep breath, they began to type. The words came unbidden, spilling onto the page as though the typewriter itself guided their hands. The protagonist stood in the middle of an endless library, its walls lined with towering bookshelves that stretched far beyond sight. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and something metallic, faint but growing stronger. The floor beneath their feet wasn't solid. It rippled with every step, as if the library were suspended on an invisible ocean. "You can't stay," the librarian's voice echoed, distant yet urgent. "If you do, you'll be lost, just like the rest of us." The protagonist hesitated, their pulse quickening as they gazed up at the ceiling. It wasn't there. Instead, a swirling void of ink-black sky loomed overhead, broken only by faint glimmers of light that resembled stars. They weren't stars. They were eyes. "I don't understand," the protagonist whispered. Their voice barely carried, swallowed by the oppressive silence. The librarian stepped closer, her form flickering like a weak signal on a television screen. Her expression was weary, her eyes filled with a despair that chilled the protagonist to the bone. "You weren't supposed to write this place," she said softly. "But now it exists, and it doesn't let go." Alex's fingers froze, their breath catching in their throat. The words were too vivid, too real, as if the library were expanding in the space around them. The desk lamp flickered, casting shadows that danced across the walls. The once solid edges of the room seemed to waver, and Alex swore they heard a faint rustling, like the pages of thousands of books being turned at once. "What do you want from me?" Alex whispered, their voice trembling. The typewriter responded. The keys clicked on their own, forming a single line on the paper. "Finish what you started." Alex felt a chill crawl up their spine. They wanted to stop, to throw the cursed machine into the woods and run, but their hands moved as if possessed. The story flowed again, pulling them deeper into its clutches. The protagonist reached for the nearest bookshelf, their fingers brushing the worn spines. The books vibrated faintly at their touch, whispering in a language they didn't understand. One book slipped from the shelf, falling open on the floor. The pages glowed faintly, and the protagonist knelt to read the words scrawled across them. It was their own life, every memory, every fleeting thought etched in perfect detail. As they read, the ink on the pages began to bleed, pooling into shapes, an open door, a staircase leading down, and the silhouette of the typewriter waiting in the dark. The librarian's voice echoed again, but this time it came from everywhere and nowhere. "The story isn't yours anymore. It's his." "Who?" the protagonist demanded, but the library trembled violently, cutting them off. The bookshelves groaned, their towering forms leaning inward as the void above began to churn. The librarian's form flickered once more, and then she vanished entirely. The protagonist was alone. Alex's heart pounded as the typewriter rattled beneath their hands, the keys clicking faster and faster, dragging them toward the inevitable conclusion. The lamp's light dimmed further, leaving the room shrouded in an unnatural gloom. The whispering grew louder, swelling into a deafening cacophony that seemed to seep through the walls. The final line appeared on the page. "The door is open, but not for you." The typewriter fell silent. The paper ejected with a sharp snap, floating gently to the floor. Alex hesitated, too afraid to retrieve it, but the pull was irresistible. Slowly they bent to pick it up, their hands trembling as they read the words. Before they could comprehend their meaning, a soft creak echoed from behind, the unmistakable sound of a door opening. Alex turned slowly, every nerve screaming in protest. The door to their writing room, which had been closed tightly, now stood ajar, revealing nothing but impenetrable darkness beyond. The whispering returned, low and insistent, forming a single phrase in Alex's mind. "Come and see." The story wasn't finished, but Alex wasn't sure they wanted to see how it would end,